Hello, everybody. Woo-hoo! Welcome to the Atlanta Mushroom Festival. Thank you all so much for coming out. It is such a pleasure to see so many people here. I was just telling a friend of ours when we first started this event, we would have like maybe two people in a room listening to our speakers. And look at us now. We're having to pull out extra chairs. So, there was seating for 100. Now there's seating for 120. If there's any space left, feel free to fill in the gaps. We're all friends here. Okay? Mushroom people are cool people. But either way, I wanted to go and introduce the folks from the Emory Center for Psychedelics and Spirituality. Yes, it's a thing. They are brand new. They are making magic happen right here in Atlanta, doing research, trying to educate people, and they were willing to come out here to have a roundtable discussion about who they are and what they're doing. Melese, Jessica, and Roman, I'm going to go ahead and hand the mic over to them and let them take it away. Much love, y'all.
Thank you. Thank you for such a nice introduction and a warm welcome. We're so happy to be here. This is, our first introduction to the community, and so it's really special for us to be here with you all. We're going to do some personal intros, but just a little bit about the center before we get into that. We were founded in 2022, and though there are other psychedelic centers, we are... Hold the mic a little closer. Oh, sorry. Can you guys hear me back there? All right. I can be a little loud. I think that's why I was holding the mic back here. Yeah, I don't know. I'll just hold it by here, right here. I don't want to, ruin the speakers. Anyways, so we are the first psychedelic center to fully integrate clinical and research-based expertise in psychiatry and in spiritual health into our research. So not only are we looking at psychedelic medicine, psychedelic therapies, and how that can affect the mind clinically, but we also are investigating and observing that subjective spiritual process that people often go through on psychedelics and the benefits, or really just how that affects the overall outcomes as well. And so what we get to do is really unique, and we're really excited to be here. As far as myself, my name is Melese Crozier. I'm an MPH. I'm not a clinical psychologist or an MD like these folks, but I do bring a really unique public health perspective, and it's really fun to just be in the room with these guys. And I have questions for them, so I'm here to learn just as much as all of you today. So.
Hi, everyone. As Melese said, such a pleasure to be here with you all today. So my name is Maples-Keller. I'm a clinical psychologist in the Department of Psychiatry at Emory. So I'll kind of just tell you all a little bit about some of the work that I do, and then some things that we're hoping to do in the future that we're very open to people's kind of thoughts and input on. So I'm do a lot of research focused on psychedelic-assisted therapy models for mental health challenges. So it's something that in grad school I got really passionate about, is the potential for psychedelics to help mental health suffering and healing. Back then it was something that definitely got laughed at, and I was told professionally, do not go down this road, but thankfully the tides have turned in some pretty major ways since then. So since about 2016, we've been doing some research with MDMA, looking at MDMA in a translational process called fear extinction learning. And from that, we've gotten a really solid foundation, and all the other research going on, that MDMA seems like it's really helpful for PTSD. So right now, I have some flyers on the table if anyone's interested, but I'm starting a clinical trial looking at MDMA in combination with a therapy we call prolonged exposure therapy for PTSD. So basically what it would look like is you do MDMA, you come in, you get screened. If you're eligible, you meet with me and another therapist, do some kind of preparation for the experience. You do an MDMA session where we'll kind of talk you through some different techniques to help with PTSD. And then there will be therapy every day for the next 2 weeks to kind of really give that support and ongoing integration and exposure therapy for PTSD. So that's going on right now. As far as some other things I've been a part of, I'm trained in psilocybin therapy for depression. So I was a therapist on the phase 2 trial for psilocybin therapy for treatment-resistant depression. I also now lead trainings on psilocybin therapy for depression and lead mentorship groups. I think another thing we need to pay attention to is like supporting therapists and facilitators who do this work. So I lead mentorship groups with individuals doing psilocybin work. And I also have another area of psychedelics work I'm really excited about. So I work with, I have a kind of group set up with Dr. Sierra Carter at Georgia State University. Sierra is just a brilliant, brilliant person who has a lab that focuses on the mental and physical health impact of racism. And her and I have worked together for a long time through Grady Trauma Project based in the Grady community. So basically for years I was just telling her, like, we need your expertise in the psychedelics world. So we have partnered and now are doing a lot of work looking at how can we actually get these treatments into communities who need them, and how can we be responsive to communities who need them? So right now, running clinical trials, as I'm sure no one's surprised to hear, it's pretty rigid in what we're able to do under the current legal infrastructure. But Sierra and I are really hoping to kind of dream of the future and dream big about, like, when these things hopefully are approved, what different models of care might look like, and how we can actually be responsive to the needs and desires of communities. So, a lot of these models have been developed by white people in predominantly white spaces. So looking at how can we actually do psychedelic care in the healthcare side of things in a culturally informed way. So we've been doing some mixed methods work there. So basically we've been doing some focus groups with members of the Grady community, kind of really seeking that input from the communities, like how do they feel about the current psychedelic treatments offered within mental health care, what their reactions are, what barriers might be, and then changes that they might want, and dreams of what things could look like in the future. And from that work, it's been really impactful, and we are starting up a kind of effort to basically develop an actual program to engage with the community. So that's something that we're kind of setting up right now, but we want to really, engage with communities who need these for mental health treatments, also engage with communities who are providing these treatments in non-academic and non-healthcare spaces. We know there's so much wisdom outside of academia that often is kind of ignored and underappreciated within our world. So also wanting to kind of set up those kind of collaborative networks with people who've been doing these practices in other settings, in other ways that have so much knowledge to that we can hopefully all work together. And we're hoping down the road to have kind of a community-focused psychedelic and other mental health care treatment space. So that's a kind of quick overview of about some of the things I do, but happy to be here and kind of talk more with you all.
Hi, everybody. I'm standing up just so that I can see folks. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to. Nice to meet you. My name is Roman Palitsky. It's really great to be in such esteemed and august company. I'm really thrilled to be meeting folks in this venue. I really want to stress this is meant to be conversational and to have an exchange. I'll share a little bit about the work that I've done, and some of it has come from adverse effects backgrounds and negative experiences people have had. And something I've learned is sometimes people will have questions, but they don't want to out themselves as the person asking the question. And we want to make sure that that's possible too. So there are some sticky notes just on the table in the back over there with our logo, ECPS. If you just want to pass up a question and you don't want to kind of identify yourself, there's room to do that as well. So who am I? I'll tell you a little bit just about myself. I'm originally from the former Soviet Union. My family came here as refugees right before the Berlin Wall fell, and have lived all over a lot of different parts of the US. My interest in training have kind of reflected that peripatetic experience. I think I've always been very interested in how do people make sense of the world and the cultural spaces that they live in. I think for me as a kid, I always kind of had to figure it out, like, oh, this is how the culture here works. And that has percolated into my academic interests. So my background is initially in the academic study of religion and the practical study of religion and ministry. I have an MDiv. And then my training is also in clinical psychology. And a lot of my interests kind of coalesce around both of those things. One around the sort of the cultural psychology of clinical care and how we can develop better informed, psychospiritually impactful treatments. And the other piece is really on the more clinical side of things, how can we take these treatments into the behavioral medicine atmospheres where we deliver care? Basically, when people are experiencing medically challenging illness, as well as psychologically challenging experiences. And if anybody here has ever been to a hospital even to visit, I think you know that any medical experience can be psychologically very challenging. So my general areas that I work in at ECPS continue to straddle these areas. So a lot of my background was in the study of meditation, and I've continued that. But within meditation, again, I've been really interested in cultural tailoring and also in the study of adverse effects. And so in psychedelic care, I continue to be interested in cultural tailoring, and I'm very interested in making sure that we do not have a blasé kind of panacea approach to psychedelics. Just like any powerful intervention, it can have powerful effects for the better, but for some people, these powerful effects can be challenging. And it would be irresponsible for us not to provide care for those people who experience untoward effects. So we want to be developing that as well. I'm also involved in what we've started calling kind of a many voices project. And this comes out of interest from religious communities in psychedelic care. So this kind of happened independently. I started to learn that people from ex-Mormon communities are turning to psychedelics as a way of informing their relationship with the divine, with spirituality, relationships that they're trying to navigate these days. Then we learned that people from Muslim communities are engaging with psychedelics and are very curious, how does this relate to my Muslim faith? People from Jewish communities are starting to seek experiences of Jewish psychedelic integration. And it became very clear that the common narrative of religion and spirituality and psychedelics, you take a psychedelic, you take psilocybin, you have a mystical type experience, whatever that is, and then you're done, and you're better for the rest of your life. Well, a lot of people's experiences don't really fit that mold, so we want to elevate the voices of people from religious and spiritual communities, also non-traditional spiritual communities, that are having psychedelic experiences that are very meaningful, but that are unique and that can expand our understanding of what spirituality means in this context. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, these guys are really cool, and I'm just honored to be able to share the stage with them. Like Roman said, we do want this to be conversational, so if you have questions and want to ask them live, like you don't want to pass up a sticky note, you can raise your hand and we can facilitate a question and answer that way as well. But before we get into that, since, again, this is our first introduction to the community, and these guys sort of do cover the community engagement arm of ECPS and their work just naturally, I wanted to take some time to hear from them what our intentions are as a center in engaging with the community. You know, what do we want our relationships to look like? What are we envisioning? So, who wants to go first?
My big fear is that I'm going to forget to name something. One of the ways that we care about interfacing with the communities we work with. I'll kind of go with some of the most salient pieces. One, again, I think that in the lab, we very rigidly control what psychedelic treatment looks like, what psilocybin therapy looks like. We did not invent any of these treatments. We did not invent any of these practices. These are practices that have been going on for conservative estimates about 10,000 years, based on archaeological evidence, in sacred contexts, which means that there's a lot of wisdom in communities that we want to make sure that we do not ignore. So one of the ways that we want to engage with the communities of care around, and I use the term communities of care because these are communities that care for people at all different transitions through life. So we want to engage with sacred, sacramental, religious communities, social communities that prefer not to use that spiritual language because it has been inhabited and tainted by, for example, forces of colonial oppression. And we want to hear from them to learn in a collaborative way, how do we deliver this care meaningfully? How do we provide support for people in the community who are seeking care and make sure that they can really benefit? So that's one way. The other is, I think, one of the things as an academic center that we do is we do a lot of research. And we're gaining momentum as a center. We're about 1.5 years old now. And the number of research studies that we are doing is only increasing. So there are flyers at the table for an MDMA-assisted therapy trial. We are about to launch several studies of psychedelic-related adverse effects. So again, we want to hear from people who have had difficult and challenging experiences. And this is going to be probably the most ambitious study of adverse effects in psychedelics that anybody has really dreamed of. We're going to follow 400 people who have reported different kinds of adverse effects and see what the trajectory of those effects has been. For whom have they resolved? What has helped the resolution of those effects? Do they all share a clinical footprint and syndrome and phenomenology? Is there something unique to what happens when somebody takes psychedelics and is struggling 4 months later? Or is it similar to what you would find with PTSD or depression? These are all unknown questions, and they really impede our ability to help folks who are struggling. So those are a couple ways.
Thanks, Roman. I think this is an area we're all really passionate about. Given my work, a lot of it being in clinical trials where we're actually testing and looking at these psychedelic-assisted therapy models, one thing I'm really passionate about is doing community outreach, specifically in communities that we know need these treatments more so, who often are the exact ones who may have valid reasons to have difficulty trusting or openness to engaging with a kind of healthcare system or a big system like we're in. So that's one area I'm really interested in engaging with community. So communities that have had, negative experiences with healthcare systems, that experience ongoing oppression, and what things might look like in order for there to be kind of enough trust and cultural humility for them to benefit from those treatments if interested. I think we're also really passionate about specifically engaging with psychedelic healers, ceremonial, ritual, all different types of people who use these medicines in their own practice. Again, I think academia is kind of off in its own world sometimes and doesn't engage with these existing models that there's so much knowledge and wisdom in. So that's another area I'm really passionate about engaging with. And then also I'm really interested in engaging with any mental health providers who are interested in this work. I think if you look at psychedelic therapists currently, they're mostly middle class and white, and I think that's a real problem. We need to be able to serve communities and have diversity in the providers as well. So I'm hoping that we can also set up a training program to provide training and experiential practice for more diverse people to kind of give, if people are interested in those pathways into being involved in this work within the healthcare side.
Thank you. So what I got from that is we want to approach this collaboratively. So please come and see us. We're going to be here for another hour after we're done with this talk. Come and see us at our table. Share your experiences. If you work with an organization, share that information with us. We want to connect with you and work with you in the community. And before we open it up for, Q&A, but if you do have questions, get ready to share them because we want to hear from you. I did want to probe them just a little bit with some public health questions. So, I studied behavioral, social, and health education sciences at Emory. And so with every health issue, every adverse outcome, I'm thinking on a systems level because not only do individual level factors affect our health, but, community level, organizational level, overall societal level factors, right? And so most of our work is predominantly done on the individual level. But I want to hear from them how they see this work fitting into the broader work that's being done to address human suffering, to address mental health outcomes in communities, and if that's like, we don't know yet, that's fine. But also, like, I just want us as a center to be thinking about these things because it's important. So take it away.
Thank you for this great question. Yeah, it's definitely something, as a clinical psychologist who does, these clinical trials that are focused on one-to-one care, I often try to really focus on, okay, how can I keep these systems level processes in mind? And something that came up during this question for me is, as I said, Sierra Carter and I have been doing these focus groups in the Grady community. And after I was kind of processing one with her, that like members of the community kept bringing up ideas of their own that were all like group related. Like, oh, could there be like group preparation? Could there be that we could come and hear a member from my community? We all get to hear about their experience and ask questions, or group integration, group dosing sessions. And I was like, oh, Sierra, that's so interesting. So many group things. And Sierra kind of looked at me like, duh, and said, collective trauma requires collective healing. And that's something that has so stuck with me. And so currently within the clinical trials, we're pretty restricted given that these are Schedule I drugs, but that is probably going to change very soon. So I think we're trying to think about how we can dream big and set up more communal and collective treatment systems, whether that's group psilocybin therapy that people can be a part of, or ongoing integration, especially maybe targeted towards people who might be having challenging experiences. They want that integration. Is it peer support integration services? So kind of thinking about how we can incorporate the collective more so in the future.
Okay, so how are psychedelics and psilocybin therapy going to change the landscape of public health? Wow. Yeah. So I'm a scientist by profession. I tend to stay away from big, bold claims. I'm going to do that now as well. But this does bring up some really important issues that I think are woven throughout the tapestry of clinical interventions. One is, I think something that psychedelics make especially relevant, but that's true about all other aspects of clinical care, is that spiritually integrated care is better care. That does not mean spiritually imposing care. It doesn't mean we're going to tell you what to think or believe, but we want to respond to people's spiritual, existential, religious, and theological characteristics, values, and that makes care better. In psychedelics, I think the science is pointing toward the clinical necessity of doing that it is demonstrably better care. So that's part of what we're doing, but we think that it translates to other fields as well. So I just said all of this stuff about how I'm a clinical scientist, but I'm the kind of clinical scientist who does not believe in an atomistic biobehavioral model of care. I actually don't think that's the scientifically best model to use. So I'll draw from another epistemology and from a teacher, Susana Bustos, who put it this way. We use a lot of plants throughout our culture that have deep histories as medicines, as partners, as allies. And when we take these plants and carelessly spread them and use them without due consideration, we could do a lot of damage. And an example of this is one of the most potent plants in the armamentarium of the Americas is tobacco. It's used sacramentally as a very powerful plant throughout. We took it out of that context and said, no, this stuff is pretty good. It's a little bit addictive. We could sell it. And we have massive health problems related to tobacco use. And I think from a public health standpoint, being diligent about these plants, these hallucinogens, psilocybin, that come from the natural world, that, again, people have formed relationships with, reciprocal relationships with, over thousands of years. I think from a public health standpoint, we cannot let those relationships slide. And we have research tools that can, in an empirical way, identify those relationships, identify the best practices for using them, and use that to improve public health.
Yeah, I just love what they both said just now, Jess, with the communal healing that is really so important. And this idea of really, Roman is really smart and he uses a lot of big words, but really what he's saying is, let's consult the people who have been using these things safely and well and have been seeing good results before we just jump in with our Western ideologies and our degrees and pretend like we know better. And yeah, I just love that. And I also want us to be inclusive of everybody in the crowd. Like I said, these people are very smart and they use big words. And so I'm going to ask Roman a question, then I'm going to get up and take some questions if you guys have them. So earlier, Roman used a word that I didn't know, psychospirituality. What does that mean?
So I'm just going to keep standing up because I'm not very tall. So I think a way that I describe the work that I care about is psychospiritually impactful interventions, which is interventions like meditation and mindfulness, like psychedelics, but also sometimes like psychotherapy, right? That can affect our spiritual sensibilities, the way that we see and relate to our spiritual world, but also affect our psychology. And for many of us, our psychology and our spirituality don't live in separate worlds. They kind of talk to each other. So that's what I meant.
Thank you. And then I also think we can infer from sort of the explanation he gave of the opposite of this word, but he said atomistic. What does that mean for us non-MDivs in here?
Sorry. Atomistic. So I'm not going to spell it. Composed of atoms, right? Atoms are, there's this belief that you can understand something by taking it apart into its parts. And that these parts, like atoms that make up our world, we used to think, are all independent. Right? And that we can understand the world by understanding each independent part. What we now know is that all of the parts talk to each other. And then it's actually very difficult to draw lines between the different things that make up, again, clinical care. Right? A person might have a cardiovascular problem. They might be experiencing heart failure. Well, that heart failure is not different meaningfully for them from the depression that they might be experiencing. If you treat the depression, you can actually improve outcomes with a heart failure. And that's just one small example from the world of behavioral medicine that I live in.
Yes, so truly integrated healthcare. Got it. So yes, again, if you have questions, raise a hand. I'll come find you. Oh, yeah? Do you want to say it on the microphone or you want to tell me? Okay. Okay.
There's so much research worldwide, and so we talk a lot about research here in Atlanta. It's national, I guess. Like, how does it compare? Because we're not new to the game. The game's been going on for a long time in other countries. So where do we fall in that?
Yes. Great question. So, simply put, also I thought you put that wonderfully. I'm not going to say it any better than you did. But she's just asking, where do we fit into the larger scope of psychedelics research going on in the country, but also in the world, and what makes us unique? So.
So one piece of information that I think is relevant to that is we're a part of international research. So the phase 2 trial I was a therapist on was international, and then the phase 3 that I'm on is international, and it is the largest psychedelic clinical trial ever conducted. I think there's like 60 different countries. And so that's been a really fascinating experience being a part of, and I also do some of the training and mentorship with that group is like, training people from other countries. Like obviously, as we're kind of talking about, all of these treatments are so culturally embedded. So getting, it's such a honestly privilege to get to like work with other therapists doing this work in other countries. There definitely are places that have had more robust psychedelic research for a long time, but I will say, like our study that started in 2016 was the first Schedule 1 study in the Southeast. So like Emory is kind of on the forefront for this region of the country. So I think that's something that we're hoping to kind of really build up, especially when you think about eventually that it might be later this year that MDMA is a legal available treatment for PTSD. That's going to be a huge game changer, and it's a huge problem if all of a sudden in the Southeast there's only like 2 places that have the actual infrastructure to provide this treatment. And what does that mean for health equity, especially being in the Southeast where we have diversity, where we have areas that are more rural, where we have like all these different factors? What does that mean for people to actually access these treatments compared to places like California and New York, where there's like so many countless psychedelic treatment facilities and clinical trials. So I would say, we've been doing what we can and are trying to really kind of build things up and are really kind of excited about expanding this work. And a piece of, I think, what makes I'll let Roman speak to ECPS specifically, but with the MDMA work we're doing, it's a pretty different model. I'm sure people in this room are familiar with the MAPS model. So one thing that makes our study unique is that it's combining MDMA with a more active treatment. So during the MDMA session, instead of it being that kind of really non-directive, that it's kind of more a specific therapeutic treatment that we're following. So that's an area that I think is more novel, and that there's a lot of kind of eyes on us about how this goes within the psychedelic community.
Yeah, I think you've basically said it all. The points I want to re-emphasize is that we're part of multiple international consortia doing this work. The adverse effects work is our upcoming planned study is collaboration between Brown University, the University of Melbourne, and Emory. We are working on projects looking at the religious and spiritual characteristics that are connected to Berkeley, to some European organizations. There's a lot of exchange in this world. None of us are doing this on our own. A few places where we're doing something unique, I think, is the landscape of spiritually informed care, of evidence-based psychotherapy treatments. And also, I think what we're doing with adverse effects really isn't being done anywhere else.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I see a hand back there. You want to come forward? Just to add to that, the way that we integrate spiritual health care is also very novel. The way that we use what lay people call chaplains. We call them spiritual health clinicians because they're trained in an evidence-based practice that they actually implement throughout the Emory healthcare system. And so we really are the only health system doing something like that. So that's very unique to what we do as well. Hi.
I'm currently doing my thesis research on women with postpartum depression and taking psilocybin mushrooms during that time period. And I was wondering, apart from the rescheduling of psilocybin, is there anything that can be done to kind of close the gap of like being able to widen the scope of psilocybin research to touch on these, human transitional experiences of the self and motherhood in general?
Yeah, great question. Here you go.
As a mother of 2 young children, hell yeah, that sounds incredible, and I would love to talk more. Hell yeah, give it up for the moms in the room and birthing people. So yeah, I would love to do work like that one day. I think, as you said, the Schedule 1, but then even after that, I think the reality is a huge continued issue is going to be cost of these models. I can tell you, running these clinical trials, it's incredibly expensive. So the fact that we have models where, it's one person with 2 licensed clinical psychologists for an 8-hour day, and then, 15 additional hours of therapy, plus all of the medical screening that's needed to do this work, the reality is they're just really expensive treatments. So that's something that I think we're all trying to really think about is, how do we actually scale these and how do we get them into these communities that really need them? So, hopefully insurances will eventually reimburse for them. But that's one is that it's basically finding funding sources for these things. If there are funding sources specific for postpartum mothers or that could be started. And then also I think on our end, thinking about how we especially once we have more flexibility outside of the Schedule 1 infrastructure, how do we set up the treatments and test them and make sure that they're safe and effective in a way where we can scale them more? So like, would it be something that would be, you know, healing to be in a group of women going through like a mushroom circle, and then that also might make it more like actually scalable in our ability to like provide access. So unfortunately, I think money's going to be a big answer because we have a lot of enthusiasm for these areas.
Something that I think about is the model of the psychotherapy that we use. So right now, typically in these trials, and the way that it's set up in places like Oregon and Colorado, is if you're interested in psychedelic therapy, you leave wherever you live in order to go there. You meet some people, hopefully you can establish a positive relationship. You get 2 sessions, maybe 3, if it's really good quality stuff. And then even if you have the best experience, right, then you have your integration sessions, maybe also 2 or 3 sessions. You go back to where you live, and you have to find a provider. You have to find a community. We don't do mental health care this way in any other domain. Why are we doing it this way with psychedelics? So I think we have good workable models of community, of continuum of care in the community. If you're working with a psychotherapist, with a mental health provider, wouldn't it be great if you could just integrate that into your care? I might take a turn going first so that you can have the last word. I feel like I keep having the last word and stuff. Yeah. Correct me if I'm getting this wrong. We keep talking about addressing problems or issues that people are having. What about people who are not coming to help with an issue, who are doing fine and who could still benefit from psychedelics?
Is that the next step to legalization? Is this going to help? I mean, surely it will, but
No.
is this how to get it in the door on the legal side of things?
And is the study of these clinical treatments, is that sort of the way to get these through FDA rescheduling and legalization? I think the short answer to the last question is yes. I think mostly this is because of who we are professionally. I'm a clinical psychologist by training. A lot of what I do is I try to figure out ways to help people who are suffering. That doesn't mean that that's the only use of these substances. It's just where my head has been.
A lot of the talk is issues to find these issues, I guess.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, like Roman said, we're clinical psychologists. Like that's what we do by training. But I think another reality too is, like you said, with the schedule and infrastructure, like a lot of these trials are set up for a medical or psychological condition, and that's often like what funding sources are willing to be able to fund this incredibly expensive research to do. So I think everyone in our center would be open to, like, down the road, is it something where it could be more focused on, like we talked about, life transitions, or, you know, more open-ended things, just healing, you know, self-exploration. Those are definitely things that I think would be great to open up down the road. Privately funded. So
We're actually in the middle of a study. Is this being recorded? Yeah. Okay. So right now we're in the middle of a study that is doing an excavation of all of the psilocybin studies that have been done, and who's been funding them. Our suspicion, as you said, is probably mostly privately funded. And personally, I think there's a reason that we have a public health research infrastructure in this country, so that it's not just private interests that are running the show.
And I'll just absolutely echo what Roman said and remind you all, you are all citizens, or maybe not, but if you're a citizen of this country, feel free to speak up. Like, let your elected officials know that you want this research funded. It was something that I'll say 10 years ago, it was a hard line in the sand. We will never fund a psychedelic trial. And that has changed now. We have the National Institute of Drug Treatments has funded a psilocybin study. The National Institute of Mental Health has not funded one yet, but has indicated more openness to it. So feel free to speak up if you want to about that, because I think it is really important given these things' potential. But as Roman said, unfortunately, that does leave us mostly only having options of like private or foundation level funding.
Do you feel like cannabis was something that helped this gateway? Because cannabis was not legal for the longest, and now we have Delta 8, Delta 9. Delta 9 is what was illegal, but
Yeah, I think it certainly has helped. You know, it's hard to know what's like causal versus what is like kind of happening at the same time with these like large shifts. Thoughts on that? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're science, you know.
Can I see? Yeah. Okay, yeah, these are great questions. I am learning that we need to organize this a little bit. So as I went around, I have several questions here on my phone that I'm gonna ask, but I'm asking everyone else who also wants to ask a question to come and line up on this side of the wall, just so we can have some sort of structure and people aren't getting skipped in line and such. So one really, difficult question that I was asked, but I also think is important, is how do I know I can trust you guys? Like, I'm in a vulnerable position, speaking as this person, like, I'm in a vulnerable state. I'm from, historically disenfranchised community, marginalized. How do I know I can trust you guys to do what you say you're doing and not be tricking me, basically? And I wanted to answer this one just as a woman who is Black, who, has my own struggles with trusting institutions like Emory University, even as a graduate from there. And I think the hard answer to that is, you don't know that you can trust us. We have to prove ourselves to you over and over and over again, and that's the only way we're going to be able to, gain community trust. And so this is sort of like a first step for us, like showing our faces, having this dialogue with the community, performing community-informed research and not just trying to reinvent the wheel or pretend that we know more than community members who have been doing this for decades. I think that's how we earn your trust. I don't know that you can choose to trust us today, though, and that's just a hard fact. So do you guys want to add to that? Yeah? Okay, I'm just getting nods. So great. Another question we had was, someone wants to know, what would you recommend as first steps for someone who's dealing with, a mental health issue, addiction, anxiety, PTSD, who wants to explore psychedelics as a treatment for these things, and they want to do it safely? What would you recommend for them? Who wants to take it?
I mean, I think that it's important to undertake these interventions with a lot of care. I keep using the term intervention, these practices, these solutions for some, right? And part of it is, again, these are pretty powerful tools, and people will probably differ in this group. For me, they're not a first-line approach. It's got a trying to think of how I would phrase this. It raises the stakes a little bit, I think, and it requires a little bit of commitment, right? So I've been struggling with depression or PTSD or anxiety. Maybe I've got a busy work trip planned, and then I've got to go right back home and deal with the kids, and there's all this other stuff. I'll just take psilocybin in between those things. It doesn't work that way, probably, or that's probably not the best way to do it. So maybe the first step is to talk to folks who are honest brokers, who are not making money off of this, who can share their experiences, share what seems to work better and worse for folks. Have somebody that you can talk to and relate to about these experiences and about your preparation who's been there and who, again, seems to be doing this responsibly, right? Again, for somebody that it's not necessarily a business for, I would suggest. And just be in conversation with that person. And if you're not connected to people like that, I think maybe that's the first step. Is this is a really nice community. There's great resources also throughout. I'm not going to put like stamp of approval behind any of these necessarily, but just to know the resources that are known are groups like ICEERS, ICEERS, who do a lot of entheogenic plant education. Chacruna does a lot of entheogenic plant education. Fireside Project does this kind of education. And just kind of get exposed to resources, probably beyond just how to change your mind. Yeah.
And I'll just add, if people are interested in being a part of clinical research, you can always go to clinicaltrials.gov. It'll tell you, so every single clinical trial in the US is required to register there, so you can search for psilocybin, MDMA, anything you're interested in. On the non-academic and healthcare side, I would say there's also a lot of amazing community healers. I think that's a little trickier to navigate, and as Roman said, sometimes it's more word of mouth and finding these like really good community practitioners who have really like well-developed systems of care, of screening people, of providing preparation, of providing, integration, ongoing support, whatever it is.
Thank you. Another one we had from the crowd was, in what ways, well, actually, do we see ourselves as reinventing the wheel, or are we building on research that was done, in the mid-1900s by our forefathers, was the language that was used. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
I don't even think we're reinventing the research wheel as much as we are reinventing things that are known in ceremonial and community-based practices. So I think, the wheel is being reinvented, and culturally things are kind of changing about legal access. These are certainly not new treatments or things that are specific to like academic healthcare.
Yeah, I think we're definitely building on it, but care nowadays looks pretty different from the way that it looked 70 years ago, in a lot of really important ways that I would not trade back. So a lot of the norms, a lot of the assumptions, a lot of the ways that we do psycholytic care, psychedelic care, we've changed, and I think for good reasons. I also think that the psychedelic research industry has a lot to apologize for the way that a lot of that research was done. Yes. I think one of the ways that we can live out an apology is to change what we're doing and to be more responsible.
And I'll just echo what Roman said. I'm sure a lot of people in this room know, but like MK Ultra was government-sponsored psychedelic research where psychedelics were administered without consent to vulnerable people. So as Roman said, like there's a lot of the historical, there was a recent study that found that 77% of the studies that were done in the early phase of psychedelic research would be like absolutely ethically not allowed by current standards. So I will echo, like we certainly have much stronger ethical standards and guardrails in place for how psychedelic research is conducted.
Yeah. Thank you for saying those things. Also, I just want to reiterate, we are going to be tabling for an hour after this, and we're not going to be able to get to everyone's questions in 8 minutes, unfortunately, because this is so fun. But our next question is, so what goes into, setting the mood for our psychedelics trials, like the one that comes to mind is Ollie John's like palliative care trial. Like how do we try and facilitate a happy experience and not an adverse one?
So I don't know if this person means more like literally how do we set the rooms up, but so that's one point I'll touch on is, so these studies take place at the Brain Health Center, so at 12 Executive Park at Emory. So it's an outpatient medical facility. So basically we do everything we can to make the actual rooms feel not like a medical facility. So I'm sure most people in this room have seen pictures from like psychedelic clinical trials. So it follows those kind of standard recommendations. So there's artwork on the walls, the person has a bed to lay in, there's 2 comfy chairs for the therapist, fresh flowers, nice lighting, speakers with music and all of weighted blanket, cozy things, all of that. And then as far as what we do to kind of, prepare people, people are screened to make sure that it's a good treatment for them to do. And then they engage in therapy sessions before the dosing session. So that's a time, like the therapeutic relationship is so important. So developing that trust, that comfort, that openness to the person earlier who said, like, how do I trust you? That's a good time if you are in that position to speak up and ask the therapist that question if you're working with them. How do I trust you? What, voicing anything that you need. Every person is an individual. So what do you specifically need to feel comfortable, to feel supported, to feel like I can ask this person for what I need and trust them and how they'll respond. So all of those things, keeping open lines of communication are kind of the standard things we do.
Did you want to add to that, Roman? Okay, great. I'm going to come here to our line of questioners. She did ask. She approached me first. I'm sorry, guys. Here you go.
So I was just curious. I'm so sorry. I was just curious. Are you the clinicians involved? How much somatic training? Like, are they somatic practitioners? As a somatic practitioner in Atlanta, I'm curious what your connection is in terms of somatic training.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm not trained in any specific somatic kind of training and protocols. I think as far as like attention to physical processes and comfort with that, those are definitely parts of these therapeutic protocols. So things like, having body scans, mindful breathing, like different practices that attend to the body. Most of the trials that have been done so far have been non-directive. So they're actually, instead of like bringing a somatic lens or something, it's really focused more on open-ended support. So that's a piece of it, but then with bringing in these skills that kind of pay attention to what's coming up in the body. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'll also share there's a little bit of a difference between the protocols that we use and the background of the people delivering those protocols. And when I talk to the facilitators and the people doing the training, many of them have backgrounds in frameworks like somatic experiencing, like Hakomi, these sort of established modalities, but these are not what is being tested in the trials. And so that's just kind of part of their own background. That said, most trials have not tested evidence-based or established therapies like either AC or Hakomi or anything else. So,
an area to pursue is what I'm hearing. All right, you wanna?
Hi, I'm Alex Himes with the Entheo Temple. One of my questions for y'all was with regards to post-integration. So there is a really deep community of psychedelic churches or psychedelic temples in Atlanta, and it's kind of unique to this city. I know there's a few other areas around the country where that exists, but we all seem to be pretty networked with each other. Have you considered, for the sake of providing places for people to plug in after they have treatment with you, to network with and meet the temple leaders or church leaders to create a panel and just say, this is a resource for you once you're done. Maybe you're already doing that, but I know we would love to meet some of you each and get to know you better as well. Yeah, thank you.
Would love to meet up. Yeah, this is definitely with the kind of community outreach and community engagement, that is definitely a part of it. Is we want to engage with community practitioners. We want to be in community, be in conversation, to have more awareness of different offerings for people, and to hopefully share and be in relation with each other. That it's there's so much that we can learn from different communities. So absolutely would love to connect after.
Yes, I thank you for that. And I also wanted to say we have plenty of people that I know come to us for help that would be much better for your setting. So, yeah, to refer back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We do have just 3 minutes left, so I think that's about enough time for one more question. Sorry, guys. But again, we'll be at our table. Come and see us, please. Here you go.
Hi, I have 2 questions, but I'll just ask one, 3 minutes. So I'm curious about, I know this was briefly mentioned, the substance abuse aspect of it. And I think for some people who don't have a deeper knowledge of it, it seems really counterintuitive. And I was wondering if people with substance use disorders are included in this treatment, and if there's been any resistance in trying to facilitate that.
Great question.
Yeah, great question. The inclusion and exclusion for clinical trials is very extensive, as you can imagine, navigating the FDA, DEA, IRB processes. But substance abuse is not a specialty area for me treatment-wise, but as, watching all the data come out showing that for people with PTSD who, went through the MAPS trials, their substance use decreased over time, that even without directly targeting it. So for my current trial, some people with substance use disorders would be eligible and some would not. So there's some pretty complicated algorithms around it, but I did what I could to kind of be more inclusive to the degree that I could make work, if that makes sense. But yeah, I think it's a huge area of research. I think the data coming out is really impressive, and so I think a lot of that work will kind of continue to expand.
Did you want to add to that, Roman? Okay, well, we've only got a couple minutes, and I would be remiss if I didn't plug our symposium coming up April 5th and 6th. My boss would be so mad at me. So if you scan this QR code and go to our events page, you're going to find all this information on what is called the Science on Spiritual Health Symposium. It's our annual symposium where we gather folks just like you and just like them, and people give talks, and there's a panel, and it sort of facilitates this discussion, and we discuss innovation in psychedelic medicine and spiritual health practices. And it's just a ton of fun, and I've been working really hard on it, and I would really love for you guys to be there and enjoy it with us. It's going to be great. Friday night, we're going to have a musical performance by some guys called the Flying Mystics, so that'll be fun. We'll feed you, and you'll get to meet these people up close. So please come and join us. Thank you for having us.